What's up guys, today we're going to be going over my first Void 3.0 build this DLC, the first of many, and this one will be on Warlock, and there's going to be all kinds of new abilities to go over in this video, so we're going to jump right into it. Before we begin, my code error is 30% off for G Fuel. Definitely take advantage of that. You can click the link in the comments description. It'll take you over to the store, find something that sounds good to you and try it out, or stock up on your faves. So jumping right into the build, first with the new exotic leg armor on Warlock. What these do is when you cast your Empowering Rift, it will proc Devour. And when you're in the Empowering Rift itself, all of your weapons will be able to disrupt combatants, which means overload rounds. So when you're on a Void 3.0, putting down your Rift will proc both Devour, and as you see, all of your weapons will have the overload symbol next to them as long as you're inside the Empowering Rift. And when I first saw this exotic, I had a little bit of hope that this might work on other subclasses. I didn't think it would, but it'd been pretty crazy if it did. But if we try out on Solar, as you see, you do not get Devour, but you still get the overload rounds for all of your weapons, and that will also work for your teammates. So that alone will be really good for Nightfalls and things with overload champions. But what this means is we don't have to rock the Feed the Void aspect on Void, because we can proc Devour from our Rift, and we don't need the aspect of proc Devour for us, which means we can use the other two, the first being Chaos Accelerant, which is the one where it will enhance your grenades. We're going to be using vortexes, which mean we'll have increased size and duration whenever we supercharge our vortex. Then we also have the other aspect, the Child of the Old Gods. We'll do a lot of these. The way it works is when you cast your Rift, you'll create a Void Soul, and the first enemy you do damage to with this ready, the Void Soul will go to the position and start draining enemies in its radius. And depending on which Rift you have, with the exotic we're stuck with Empowering Rift, while it drains enemies, it will return health to you, and any enemy that dies that was being drained, you will get class ability back upon their death. So there's a lot going on there. Looking at it in game, simply put down your Empowering Rift, you shoot a target, the Void Soul will go to that location, and from there it will start draining any enemy nearby, and as it drains them, you will constantly get chunks of your health back with Empowering Rift. And any enemy that dies that was being drained, as you see, you get a huge chunk of your class ability back. I already have a next one ready to go. And you might have seen in that clip that whenever an enemy died from the drain, it procced this fragment, which is ability final blows cause targets to explode, which is the old bloom. So that worked with the Void Soul along with your grenade, melee, and also your super. So more or less bloom for all of your abilities, which is obviously extremely good. The last thing we have to show off for the Void Soul is how the weakening part works. So weakening means debuff, and if we look at damage on Carl, we hit for that number usually. Now we go ahead and proc the Void Soul on him. He will be debuffed, and the number will go up to this, which is going to be a 15% debuff, just like the Void Oppressive Darkness 2.0. And that debuff did not stack with other debuffs in the game. So let's see if this one does. So pairing it with something like Tractor Cannon, going to look at damage on Carl. Once again, first without anything going on, then with the Void Soul, then finally with the Tractor Cannon on top of it. As you see, just like the Oppressive Darkness 2.0, it does not stack with other debuffs in the game, which is not too surprising because of how often you can proc this, but still going to be extremely useful for just general play. And if you're playing solo, you'll still have a debuff that you can apply without needing something like Tractor. The next fragment we'll be using is the Echo of Remnants, which will make our vortex last longer. So that combined with the aspect and the buff to vortex grenades in general, where they pull enemies towards the center, obviously this vortex will now be extremely huge in radius and last very long. So our grenade alone is extremely powerful. It's almost like a mini Nova Bomb in a way. And to further enhance this grenade, we're also using the Oppressive Darkness 2.0 Echo of Undermining, which will weaken enemies that take damage from our Vortex Grenade. And once again, this will not stack with other debuffs in the game, but it will be that 15% increase. And with how many Vortex Grenades we'll be throwing with this build, and how large the radius is, pretty much everything's going to be debuffed by that 15% while we're using this build. So that's all the stuff we have going on for Void 3.0. Now looking at the mods we're using, we're going to have two different ones to create Void Elemental Wells. The first one being Reaping Wellmaker, which is whenever we put down our Empowering Rift, our next weapon final blow will create a Void Elemental Well. And this does not have to be a Void weapon, just any weapon in general will work with this. The second way will be Elemental Ordnance. So whenever we get a final blow with our Vortex Grenade, which will be all the time, we'll create a Void Elemental also. And when we pick those up, we have a few things going on. The first one right here will be Well of Tenacity, which just got buffed to 50% and is more or less the new Protective Light. So how that works is we pick up the Void Elemental Well, and we'll get 5 seconds of 50% less damage incoming, which is gonna be really good. And with this build, we'll be picking up the Void Elemental Wells all the time, so more or less just always taking 50% less damage. The next mod we have on to take advantage of the Elemental Wells will be Font of Might, which is going to be a 25% buff, which will stack with other buffs in the game, along with one of the 2 debuffs we have going on in Void 3.0, the Oppressive Darkness or the Void Soul. So completely by ourselves, we have Empower Rift, we have Font of Might, then we also have one of the 2 debuffs, so we're giving ourselves a pretty good damage increase to our Void weapons. And the last mod we have on is going to be one from the artifact, the Volatile Flow, which is where we pick up a Void Elemental Well, will grant our Void weapons volatile rounds. And if you don't know what that means, think the old Middle Tree Void Titan. Every time we do damage with our weapon, it will prime the target with more or less just like a bloom ready to explode. If they die, it will then proc it, or if you hit them again, it will proc it. So it pretty much just gives all of our Void weapons explosive payload plus built-in bloom, which is obviously extremely crazy, and instantly transforms any Void weapon in the game into one of the best accuracy weapons in the history of the game. It is so strong, this mod, and it's definitely the first right column mod on your artifact you should unlock once you have enough slots available. It is that good. And some of the final mods we have going on in this build, the first one will be on our gauntlets right here, which is the one called Bolstering Detonation, which is whenever we do damage with our grenade, we'll get class ability back. So along with the Void Soul draining enemies and getting class ability back, this will also help and ensure that we have our next rift when we need it. Once you have Devour going, you don't really need to place another rift unless you want another Void Soul. But those 2 things working together helps make sure that we have it when we need it. And another artifact mod I have on is this one that will enhance our super, called Devouring Depths, where if you cast your super while critically wounded or under the effects of Devour, it will increase the damage with that super. So if we look at damage on Carl without that going on, with Nova Warp we usually hit for 71,000. Now if we go and put down a rift to proc Devour first and go in with our super, it will now do increased damage, hitting for 93,000, which is going to be a 30% increase for the entire duration of our super. And another thing we can do to further combo that is when we put down our Empowering Rift, just simply shoot the boss first to proc the Void Soul, which will start draining him and weaken him, which will give us another 15% debuff to our super damage and just making it that much stronger. And obviously this will work with all 3 of the Void supers. I've been using Nova Warp a lot for Actor, but obviously the 2 Nova Bomb variants are going to be really good for single target damage and boss damage. And I believe their damage were always pretty similar. I think the Shattering one was slightly higher, and I haven't used it yet, but I believe that would be the better one for boss DPS. On our helmet, we have Ashes Assets to help get our super back. Then we have Harmonic Siphon to create Orbs of Power on Void Weapon Final Blows, which brings me to what weapons you can use with this build. Well, most of the build doesn't require any weapon in particular to work. You could be using the new Osteo SMG and this build will work perfectly fine. I would just take off volatile rounds and put on Bountiful Wells instead. But to take advantage of Font of Might and the Volatile Flow, you need a Void weapon, and there's all kinds of great picks. The best one from this season so far is Funnel Web, which is a Void SMG that can roll with some pretty good perks. I'll definitely be making a review on this once I get a few more rolls of it. That'd be my go-to pick for this build from this season. But what I've been using is using a kinetic weapon with Osmosis, which means I can then have more or less 2 Void weapons at the same time, which allows me to also use a Void special weapon in my energy slot, for example the new Glaive, or you can even use the old Deathly Whisper with Wellspring, both of which will be extremely good. But no matter what, if you want the build to work, you just need a Void weapon on in general. If it has Demo or Adrenaline Junkie, that'll be even better, but definitely not required, which is one of the cool parts about this build that kind of works with anything. You don't really need necessarily a certain loadout to make it work. One thing to note with the Glaives is the Volatile Rounds does not work on the melee attacks, it's only on the actual shooting of the Glaive itself, which isn't that big of a deal. It's still obviously extremely strong. Then for Deafening Whisper, with the way the Vortex pulls enemies towards the center, obviously that will make it very easy to land the Deafening Whisper on all the enemies, and that combo will just simply kill everything in the game. I mean, Volatile Rounds on a Waveframe GL on top of the Vortex Grenade and Oppressive Darkness, I mean, they're dead. Then if you choose something like the Funnel Web, that will obviously work extremely well with Volatile Rounds because of how fast the RPM is. It'll be proccing those rounds extremely fast and getting that bloom to explode. So overall, all the options are extremely good and you can use kind of whatever you want. And finally, in my heavy slot, I have the Parasite on because it just works extremely well with this build. For all the act clear, major clear, and everything leading up to boss fights, you can just use your abilities and your volatile rounds, and all that will get you to times 20 with the worm launcher, and you'll be ready to just completely nuke whatever boss comes up. You could also use a void weapon instead, for example like Deathbringer, to still take advantage of Phantom Might and volatile rounds even on your heavy weapon, which I don't think is necessary, but something you can definitely do. And yeah, I think that is pretty much it for this build. There was a lot going on. I didn't even really talk about the basic parts of Devour, where every single kill will give you full health bar instantly, which means you will never die. Then on top of that, the other basic part of Devour of getting roughly a 6-level grenade back on every kill. I mean, yeah, you just have infinite grenades without even taking into account the void elemental wells and demo on your weapons. Then just constant health regen from both the kills itself, then your void soul also. I mean, yeah, it's just a lot. Hopefully I covered it in a way that it all made sense of why every part of this build is the way it is. And overall, it's definitely my favorite Warlock build I've found so far. I'm sure there's going to be multiple this season on all 3 characters. I've been really enjoying Titan and Hunter also, so I'll be making all kinds of builds with those characters too on Void 3.0. So yeah, let me know what you think about this build. I should be able to link in the description the dim loadout. That way you can easily equip this build on your account. And the rest of the video will just be some strike gameplay with the build. Once again, my code AIR is 30% off for G Fuel. That's definitely the best way to support me besides watching my videos. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.
Dense hive signatures in a facility up